I swear, I still can't believe it happened in my town. It's the kind of thing you hear about on the news, not something you expect to see with your own eyes. I lived 2 doors down from the Millers. Nice couple, at least on the surface. Tom and Janet Miller were the kind of people who always waved when you drove by. Tom mowed his lawn every Saturday morning. Janet baked cookies for the neighborhood block parties. You'd never think they had a dark side, but they did. They adopted Elijah about 5 years ago. He was only 8 when he came to live with them. This quiet little black boy, who'd lost his parents in a car crash. Everybody thought they were saints for taking him in. Giving a kid a second chance, people said. But behind closed doors, things were different. I only found out the truth because of their daughter, Abby. She was a couple years younger than Elijah, maybe 6 when they adopted him. She was always this shy, sweet kid who liked to draw with chalk on the driveway. One day, she came knocking on my door, her face pale as a sheet. "Mr. Reed," she whispered, clutching her little stuffed rabbit. "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. "It's about Elijah," she said. "Mommy and Daddy, they're mean to him, really mean." I didn't know what to make of it at first. I mean, kids say all sorts of things, right? But Abby wasn't the kind of kid who made things up. Her voice was shaking, and her eyes were wide with fear. So I told her to wait inside while I called someone. That someone was the police. When they showed up, they wanted to know why I thought something was wrong. I didn't have much to go on besides Abby's word, but I insisted they check it out. And thank God I did. They found Elijah in the basement. The Millers had turned it into some kind of makeshift cell. There was a chain bolted to the wall, attached to a metal collar around his neck. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just some dirty jeans, and his skin was covered in bruises and scars. He was so thin, I could see his ribs. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He didn't even flinch when the cops burst in like he'd given up a long time ago. The Millers tried to play dumb at first. Janet was crying, saying it was all a misunderstanding. Tom tried to say Elijah was troubled, and they had to discipline him, but there's no excuse for what they did. No amount of tears or smooth talking could explain away the horrors in that basement. It all came out during the trial. The Millers had been using Elijah as their personal servant, cooking, cleaning, doing yard work, things no kid should have to do. If he messed up, they beat him. When he got too old to control with just threats, they started using that chain. I felt sick listening to the testimonies. But the part that stuck with me most was Elijah himself. When he finally took the stand, he was calm. Too calm for a kid who'd been through hell. He talked about how he'd prayed every night for someone to save him, how he didn't hate the Millers, even after everything they'd done. He said he just wanted to be free. The jury didn't take long to convict. Tom and Janet got life in prison. No parole. Good riddance. But here's the twist. Elijah, this kid who'd been treated like dirt, ended up saving Abby's life not long after the trial. She got lost in the woods behind their house one afternoon, and it was Elijah who found her. He heard her crying and stayed with her until help arrived. When I asked him why he'd do that after everything, he just shrugged and said, "She's not like them. She didn't deserve to be hurt. Elijah's with a new family now, a good one. They let him be a kid. He's in high school playing basketball and thinking about college. Sometimes I still see him around town, and he always gives me a smile and a wave. I wish I could say stories like his are rare, but they're not. There's a lot of darkness in this world. But every now and then, you meet someone like Elijah, someone who refuses to let that darkness win, and that gives me hope." Elijah's story didn't just change his life, it changed ours too. The whole neighborhood had to face some uncomfortable truths about the people we thought we knew and the things we ignored. I remember how quiet the block was after the Millers were arrested. It was like everyone was too ashamed to talk about it. People whispered in their houses but avoided each other on the street. We'd all been so quick to praise the Millers for their selflessness when they adopted Elijah, but none of us had noticed the warning signs, or maybe we just didn't want to. The way Elijah would flinch when Tom raised his voice. How Janet never let him play with the other kids at block parties. The way he always looked down at the ground, like he was afraid to make eye contact with anyone. We should have seen it. I should have seen it. One day, about a month after everything came out, I saw Elijah again. He was sitting on the swings at the park, just watching the other kids play. I sat down on the bench nearby and waited a minute before I called out to him. "Hey Elijah, how you holding up?" He didn't answer right away. just kept swinging, his feet barely brushing the ground. "I'm okay," he finally said. "It's different now, but better." "Good. You deserve better," I told him. He looked at me then, his eyes sharp and tired in a way that no kid's eyes should ever be. Why didn't anyone stop them before? I felt my throat close up. How do you answer a question like that? I didn't want to lie to him, so I told him the truth. Sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them, or maybe they don't want to see it. But that's not your fault, Elijah. None of this was your fault. He nodded, like he understood, but I don't think he fully believed me. Not yet, anyway. Over time, things slowly started to change. People in the neighborhood became more watchful, more willing to step in when something didn't feel right. A few of us even got together and started a community group to support foster kids and adoptive families, to make sure no other kid would slip through the cracks like Elijah did. And Elijah? He kept surprising us all. He joined the school debate team and started talking about becoming a lawyer someday. "I want to help kids like me," he told me once, "so they don't have to go through what I did." When I think about him now, I don't just see the scared, broken kid from the miller's basement. I see someone who took all that pain and turned it into strength. He could have let it ruin him. He could have stayed angry or bitter. But he didn't. He chose to forgive and not for them, but for himself. Elijah reminds me that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way to find the light. Sometimes, it's in the smallest acts of kindness. Other times, it's in the courage to stand up and say, "This isn't right." I'll never forget what Abby said to me after Elijah saved her in the woods. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Elijah's my hero, and you know what? He's mine too." The years went by, but Elijah never stopped being part of our lives. Even though he had a new family, he still kept in touch with people in the neighborhood, especially Abby. She treated him like the big brother she'd always wanted, even though their shared history was painful. Abby struggled for a while after everything came out. She went to therapy to process the trauma of what her parents did, and Elijah was a big part of her healing. He never blamed her for what happened, even when she blamed herself. "They were my mom and dad," she told him once, tears streaming down her face. "I should have told someone sooner." "You were just a kid," Elijah said gently. "You did the best you could, and in the end, you saved me." That was Elijah always looking for the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. As Abby got older, she became more outspoken, especially when it came to issues of racism and injustice. She said she couldn't ignore it anymore, not after seeing what Elijah went through. She joined a youth advocacy group in high school and later went on to study social work in college. Elijah and Abby stayed close, even as their lives took them in different directions. Elijah got a scholarship to a state university and majored in criminal justice. He worked part-time at a community center mentoring at-risk kids. I think he saw himself in a lot of those kids, angry, scared, and just looking for someone to believe in them. One summer, Elijah and Abby organized a town meeting to talk about child welfare and the foster care system. It was the first time Elijah spoke publicly about his experience. He stood in front of a room full of people, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not here to make you feel sorry for me," he said. "I'm here because there are kids out there right now who need help. Kids who are being hurt, ignored, or forgotten. We can't keep looking the other way. We have to do better." By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. That night, I went up to him and shook his hand. "You're one hell of a young man, Elijah," I said. "I hope you know how proud we all are of you." He smiled that quiet, humble smile of his and said, "I'm just trying to make a difference, Mr. Reed." And he did. Years later, Elijah became a defense attorney, specializing in cases involving foster children and abused minors. He fought tirelessly for kids who didn't have a voice, just like he'd once been. Abby, meanwhile, worked with nonprofit organizations to provide support for families and children in crisis. Together, they made a formidable team. Every now and then, they'd come back to the old neighborhood. We'd sit on my porch and talk about everything: life, work, the memories that still haunted them but didn't define them anymore. One day, I asked Elijah if he ever thought about the Millers. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not in the way you'd think. I don't hate them. I feel sorry for them. They were so full of anger and ignorance. They couldn't see what they were doing to themselves. They lost everything because of their choices." He paused, staring out at the street where he used to ride his bike when he was little. I've spent my whole life trying to make sure no one else has to feel what I felt. That's what matters to me now. As I watched him and Abby laugh and reminisce, I realized something important. Elijah wasn't just a survivor. He was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of forgiveness. He taught us all that even in the darkest of times, it's possible to find light and to become that light for someone else. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Elijah didn't just save Abby. He saved all of us in his own way. As time went on, Elijah's work began to ripple far beyond our small town. His name started appearing in news stories and legal journals. He was the kind of lawyer who took on cases no one else wanted, the messy, heartbreaking ones where children had fallen through the cracks. He didn't do it for fame or money. He did it because he understood what it was like to be invisible. One of his biggest cases was for a group of foster kids who had been abused in a private care facility. The institution had a spotless reputation on paper, but behind closed doors it was a nightmare. Elijah dug deep, uncovering years of neglect and corruption. When the case went to court, he didn't just win. He got the facility shut down and the kids placed in better homes. "I'm not done yet," he told reporters after the verdict. "This isn't just about one facility. It's about fixing a broken system." His words resonated far and wide. People started calling him the Advocate, a nickname he hated but couldn't shake. He became a voice for change, someone who spoke for the silenced and the forgotten. Meanwhile, Abby was making waves in her own right. She helped create a program that paired young social workers with mentors who had lived through the foster care system. She told her colleagues that working with Elijah had taught her the importance of listening, not just to what kids said, but to what they didn't say. "I used to think I couldn't do anything to make up for what my parents did," she confided to me once. "But Elijah helped me see that it's not about making up for the past. It's about building a better future." The two of them started hosting workshops together, traveling to different cities to train people on how to spot the warning signs of abuse and advocate for vulnerable children. Their bond was unshakable, a testament to the idea that family isn't just about blood. One summer evening, a few years after Elijah won that landmark case, he came back to the neighborhood for a visit. He and Abby stopped by my house, and we sat on the porch like old times. "Elijah," I said, "do you ever think about where you'd be if Abby hadn't come to me that day?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, "but I don't dwell on it. What happened, happened. I can't change the past, but I can choose what to do with it. That's what keeps me going." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You've done more than just keep going. You've done more good in your 30 years than most people do in a lifetime." Abby smiled at him, her eyes shining with pride. "You always said you wanted to help kids like you," she said. "And you've done that. You've helped more people than you'll ever know." Elijah looked down at his hands, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's not just me. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the people who believed in me, people like you, Abby, and my new family. You all showed me what love really looks like. That's what made the difference." As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I realized how much Elijah had changed all our lives. He wasn't just a survivor or a hero. He was proof that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, there's a way forward. Elijah's story wasn't just his own, it was a reminder to all of us that we have the power to stand up, speak out, and make a difference. And as long as he was out there fighting for others, I knew the world was a little brighter, a little better, because of him.